There we go. Oh, Pastor Jim. All right, Whitney, go ahead. I think you are muted.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. And good morning to the people watching the recording. I'm glad you get to be a part of this. If you haven't already, I recommend putting yourself on mute and your view on speaker view in, I almost said Canvas, like I have my professor hat on, in Zoom. My name is Dr. Whitney Griffin, and I am a mindfulness educator as well as a psychology professor at a couple of community colleges. And it's the holiday season. And so I'm going to be leading a cognitive diffusion meditation. Cognitive diffusion is a tool that, when mindfully and diligently practiced, serves to disentangle you from the thoughts that cause you to suffer. The first step is to recognize that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. You are the observer of your thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. To begin yourself from unnecessary emotional suffering, preaching to myself this morning, unnecessary emotional suffering begins with your willingness to look at your thoughts in a different way. If your patterns of thinking and negative self-talk tends to cause you emotional distress, begin to ask yourself how you're willing to consider your thoughts differently, rather than choosing to be caught up in negative thinking to the point where you lose perspective. In this meditation, we will begin to let go of your attachment to that negative thinking. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself." So find a comfortable seat, uncross your legs, and plant both feet firmly on the ground. Perhaps you scoot up in your chair so that your knees stack over your heels. And maybe your arms rest by your side, perhaps in your lap, or maybe your arms rest on your armrest. And send your heart forward and your crown of your head up to the sky for a nice long spine. Exhale all of the old air out of your mouth. Inhale from the soles of your feet to the crown of your nose, or the crown of your head through your nose. And open mouth, exhale. Your eyes, or rest them gently on a fixed spot. Sitting beside a gently flowing stream with leaves floating along the surface of the water. For minutes, take each thought that enters your mind and place it on a leaf. Thought, whether it's pleasurable, painful, or neutral, or enthusiastic thoughts, place them on that leaf and let them float by. Early stop. Continue to watch the stream. Soon your thoughts will start up again. Float at its own pace. Don't speed it up or rush your thoughts along. You're not pushing these along to get rid of your thoughts. You're allowing them to come and go at their own pace. If your mind says, "This is dumb," or "I'm bored," or "I'm not going the right place," or the right pace, place the leaves too and let them pass. painful feeling arises, acknowledge it. I notice myself having a feeling of boredom, impatience, frustration. Leaves and allow them to float along. Your thoughts may hook you and distract you from being fully present in this meditation. This is you've become sidetracked. Gently bring your attention back to the visualization exercise. Begin to deepen. At our heart center. Thank you for allowing yourself the time and the space to create space. Space in the heart for feelings to come and go at their own pace, allowing for acknowledgement. Hands between your third eye center, your seat of intuition. Thank you for creating space for your thoughts to come and go without being rushed or dismissed, allowing them to be acknowledged and accepted. And hands hovering above you, acknowledging the space that we're all connected. The simple meaning of namaste is that the light, the teacher, and the student in me disentangles from the thoughts that cause me to suffer because of the light, the teacher, and the student in you. Bow forward to sealing your practice for the day with a namaste. Namaste. Thank you for helping me by helping yourselves being willing to look at our negative self-talk. Thank you from going from willfulness to willingness. That's been my message this whole year. I appreciate you all. Have a wonderful meeting. Thank you for being willing to open up. Thank you, Darcy. And have a great rest of your day. I will see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Whitney. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
I was having some audio problems. Were you also experiencing that? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad to know it was just on my end. So I am going to turn this over to Brian. Brian Hardgrave is a friend of mine. He's just, I think, one of the most remarkable people I know. He's compassionate and he's brilliant. And so I am excited about this. This particular topic is one that is very, very important to us. We started doing these faith-based trainings for organizations, you know, community, faith, churches, synagogues, temples that are dealing with a lot of homeless people living on their properties, trying to figure out how to deal with people that are having mental health issues. And so this is really, really important. A lot of people are very reticent to call 911 or to know when the right time is to call 911. But safety is very, very important. So Brian, I turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Of course. And can I just get a thumbs up if someone can hear me? Because I was having audio issues as well. Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you, Darcy. And thank you, Dr. Griffin, for the mindfulness exercise. I'm certain Darcy confused my bio and introduction with someone else, but I will take it. Those were extremely kind words. I'm going to click through our presentation. And if you see me stare off to other parts of my screen, it's simply because I'm following along on a second screen to make sure that what I'm trying to show you is in fact what's on the screen. So I wanted to start with a brief introduction of my co-presenters and speakers today. I'm going to take one look at how many folks we have. I see 21 participants, although I'm in there twice. Good sized group. So I am Brian Hardgrave. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've got about 12 years experience working with people experiencing homelessness and severe and persistent mental illness. I've been with the city of Santa Monica for about 6.5 years. And in my current capacity, I help coordinate local outreach in response to people experiencing homelessness, and do a lot of coordination with our police and fire departments, local faith communities, housing authority, city attorney's office, Big Blue Bus, transit, basically any city department. It goes on and on and on. And I'm excited to join you and share some ideas, but really I wanted this to be as interactive as possible. I will allow my co-presenters, Sergeant Gilmour with the Santa Monica Police Department and Dr. Raymond Hsu from the Los Angeles Police Department, police psychologist, to introduce themselves. So I'll hand it over to Sergeant Gilmour for a brief introduction of himself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. We have a handful of good topics. Hopefully get some good discussion going. I'm Lewis Gilmour. I'm a police sergeant with Santa Monica Police Department, and I oversee our homeless liaison program and our crisis negotiation team as well. Our homeless liaison program, we work hand in hand with Brian's team in human services and social services and our city attorney's office as well to provide outreach and enforcement for those experiencing homelessness. What our main mission to do, we'll go out there day in and day out. We try to make meaningful engagement, meaningful contacts, build rapport, show empathy, try to get to know those that are out there experiencing different types of trauma, mental health issues, substance abuse problems. And we try to refer them and triage into different social service programs. So we work hand in hand with different social service providers and city partners as well, in order to find productive outcomes and solutions for some of our most vulnerable population. And then with our crisis negotiation team, part of what we do is deal with those in high-level critical incidents such as hostage situations, barricades, and suicidal persons as well. So the foundation of our crisis negotiation team is built on empathy. It's built on active listening skills, trying to recognize emotion in people and validate their experience that they're going through in order to lower the emotions that they're experiencing to try to guide them on a path towards productive decision-making. We also work hand in hand with a lot of Dr. Hsu's partners at LAPD. And a lot of our crisis negotiators are also on our homeless liaison program. So we do provide training both locally and regionally too in active listening skills and de-escalation. I'll turn it over to Dr. Hsu.
Thank you. Dr. Raymond Hsu, currently with the LAPD as a police psychologist. Actually came from the county, so DMH, where the last position I held was working with homeless veterans directly, trying to get them housed through a housing first model. I transitioned over in 2016, and since then, just been on the department and providing as many services and resources to LAPD employees as possible. What Sergeant Lewis was saying in regards to crisis negotiation, all the police psychologists are part of the SWAT team, SWAT cadre. As a crisis negotiator, our role is consultative. So we'll offer direction, we'll help collect information. Very rarely will we ever be in direct contact with suspect or whatnot. But it really is all about that de-escalation and how we can get to that point using empathy and active listening skills, etc. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to share anything that I can offer. So thank you.
Great. I wanted to just open the training or this opportunity just to ask two questions of the group and use the chat as that platform. The first is if you can be so brave to type in the community either where you live or the community where you are affiliated with a faith-based or a charitable organization. Because I recognize this is the West Side group. So we have some Santa Monica-based groups as well as those from Pacific Palisades, Venice, Brentwood, Westwood, Culver City, Beverly Hills, Westchester. So if you can start putting those communities in the chat. Part of the reason I'm going to be asking that is because different law enforcement jurisdictions are different based on where you live or where you practice. So we will try to focus on higher level general tips as opposed to, well, when you're in this corner of this pocket of the county, this is the number to call. We want our tips to be as useful and practical as possible for everyone. And then second, I also want to encourage people to use the chat to ask any questions along the way. And I'll ask Darcy, Dr. Hsu, and Sergeant Gilmour, anyone really, to keep an eye on the chat. Don't sit on a question, because my experience has been you may forget by the time we get through our material. So put a question out there and we'll do our best to address it in the flow of our conversation. So again, we want this to be as interactive as possible. Let's see who we've got here. Culver City, Palms, Westwood, Brentwood. Oh, wow, there we go. St. Paul's Lutheran in Santa Monica, but live in Westchester. Very good. And for myself, I work in Santa Monica, but I live in Boyle Heights. So I can resonate with folks who have a foot in two worlds. All right, so we're going to start clicking through. So far, technology is cooperating. We really wanted to talk, and again, Dr. Hsu and Sergeant Gilmour, please unmute yourselves and pepper whenever you have anything to share. We want to just encourage this community here to familiarize yourself with the groups that are serving vulnerable populations. We're all in Service Planning Area 5, and there's a coordinated entry system for homeless services and outreach. And St. Joseph Center is the regional lead agency for adults and for families experiencing homelessness. So we know that best practices for homeless outreach is for it to be proactive, going out in advance, looking for people, as opposed to simply reactive and responding to calls. What we found a lot of times is a request will go in through the LA County Homeless Outreach Portal, and it might be several days before a team can get out there. And with a population that is as transitory as ours, sometimes that's all it takes for people to relocate. So anyway, we want you to familiarize yourself with the groups with St. Joseph Center and with other mental health organizations in your area, so that you can have conversations with them in advance, because they are the experts. We are not the subject matter experts. These groups are going to be very helpful in terms of making sure you know what resources are available, what you can offer, really what can be expected when a person experiencing homelessness is brought into an access center or into a shelter environment or somewhere else. So that's my first tip, is before the crisis begins, there's a lot of work that can be done. We also want to make sure that people are equipped with different numbers and different resources based on the different types of situation. We understand there is some reluctance to calling 911, and this can be for a number of reasons. It's an expensive resource. A lot of times there are crises where sending a sworn officer in a black and white vehicle, lights and sirens, and with a gun may not be the most appropriate response. And we'll get into some of the criminal justice and crisis reform efforts that are underway. And then other times, there are just different teams like joint law enforcement mental health co-response teams or DMH psychiatric mobile response teams that can be dispatched. So we want to make sure that folks are equipped in advance with these numbers, and we'll get into that later. And then as far as collaborating with law enforcement before a crisis begins, we really want to encourage faith communities that aren't doing so already to get to know your local neighborhood lead officer or your senior lead officer in your community. The structure might change depending on what city or jurisdiction you live in. So I don't want to give a blanket website that says, here's where all the senior lead officers, but for the city of Santa Monica, we have a community affairs unit and a neighborhood resource officer or two for each of the 4 beats of the city. And they're really great contacts to kind of develop these collaborative relationships, have a friendly face of somebody that you know, and they can also help troubleshoot some ongoing issues that may occur in your community. And then finally, we want to have, we know there's an upcoming training next month or at the next one around setting boundaries, but we really want to encourage people to recognize your own limits, the trauma that folks may be bringing with them into a crisis may exceed your own coping skills and your own resources to de-escalate it. Maybe you follow the de-escalation tips and the mental health 101 trainings from earlier in the series. Maybe you follow them to a T, and yet there's still a crisis that is beyond what you can control. So recognize your own limits, know when you're ready to call for extra help, and know who you're going to call. So I did want to invite Sergeant Gilmour to kind of pepper in, as he is the supervisor of the crisis negotiation team, to kind of define a little bit about what a crisis is, talk about what we mean when we say situational awareness. And again, we don't want to unpack all of de-escalation since we know that was covered in a previous training, but I'll hand it over to Sergeant Gilmour.
Sure. I think, as Brian had mentioned on the previous slide, getting to know your local law enforcement and what programs that they offer is a huge step. From our personal experience, when we build relationships, such as we're starting to do now with having us come to trainings like this, you'll have a point of reference, because a lot of these issues you may be experiencing could be something in a gray area. It may not be black and white as far as, do I call 911? Is it an emergency? Is it something less where I call a non-emergency number? Does my local agency have a co-response model? Like in Santa Monica, we have Department of Mental Health clinicians assigned to our officers that will respond out as a joint partnership. And then building those relationships, if you have regular individuals that are causing issues or you have your own relationships with, we can do a lot of work ahead of time. So we can do a lot of work to try to triage certain folks into different programs to try to build rapport and display empathy far before a crisis actually takes place. And then when a crisis does take place, some of those relationships and rapport building has already taken place that should help a lot. So from our standpoint, when we look at a crisis, we look at an emotionally stressful event, usually from an abrupt or impending change from something that's going on in their life. That could be they just lost their job, a death in the family, dealing with a mental health or alcohol issue, or really anything that's relevant to that person that they deem as a crisis. And Brian, if you want to go to the picture on the next slide. So when we look at it, this is our model for crisis negotiating. So if we look at the horizontal dotted line, that's our normal functioning level. When emotions are high, rationality goes down. And so what we use that for, when someone is upset, when they're in the moment, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, when they're sad, oftentimes we're so consumed with our emotion that our ability to think rationally through the problem kind of goes down. And that's true for all of us, really, right? When we get upset, we want people to listen. We want our voices heard. We want to feel validated of the experience that we're going through. We don't want someone to solve our problem right away. We're not ready for it. So a lot of it is dealing and recognizing with someone in crisis, knowing that their emotions are going to be at an elevated level. And so we use the de-escalation, the active listening skills in order to validate, allow people to vent. And then once the emotional level has kind of gone down a little bit, then we're ready to offer solutions. And so we don't always want to rush that process. And this is a nice little graphic taken from the FBI Crisis Negotiation Manual to help illustrate when emotions go up, rationality goes down.
And I just wanted to pop back in terms of situational awareness. I always remind people that you're bringing your own baggage and your own experiences into a crisis. It's not simply the person in crisis. So I always use the examples that hit home to me. If I've spilled coffee on my lap on my way to work, if I had an argument with a loved one, if I didn't sleep well or slept, and hurt my neck, like I'm bringing that. So my personality is both the most effective tool and sometimes the most dangerous weapon I could be bringing with me into a crisis. So know yourself, know your surroundings too. This could be as concrete as how is your office set up or the place where you are on campus at your faith community? Where is your exit if you need to extricate yourself from the situation? Where's the person in crisis's exit? Because they likely don't want to be enclosed too. So being aware of your surroundings, if you can tell using the basic de-escalation tips from previous trainings with that somebody's nonverbal cues are sending off that they are agitated or they are in crisis, try to see if you can have that conversation outside in an area where maybe they can get away or you can get away if needed, or at least where there's a line of visibility to another person who can be called for help. And then something else we like to encourage people to do is I don't know if you're all in the same room with fellow folks from your community, but try to develop some code words that can be unequivocal when you need help. I know one office community said, hey, can I borrow a blue highlighter? That was code for this situation is escalating. We need somebody to either call the police or keep your ear out. I might need some help. So each community and each campus will be different in terms of your needs. It may not be feasible. Maybe you do a lot of your work alone, but if you have an opportunity to share, we call it the buddy system. Come up with a code word and really practice it. It can be playful too. You want to make sure that it's a code word that you'll remember. You don't want somebody walking over with a literal blue highlighter when you're in crisis. So try to make sure that your descriptor is as helpful as necessary.
I'll add too on the situational awareness. It's also a good idea to talk about your own personal limitations ahead of time. So if you have conversations with your peers, your staff, or those that you encounter, you can kind of pre-game your comfort level of certain behaviors that a person might display, so that you know if a situation starts escalating, you've already pre-thought of strategies or plans. You've pre-thought of, if person does X, then that's when I'm going to call 911. If someone is exhibiting a certain behavior, that's when I'd rather meet with them in a more public area where I could run away or leave, or if I needed to. So it's the same thing that we have our officers do too. We run different scenarios and come up with different situations, and then we try to work through it and figure out what would be a good response. What are things that we haven't thought of? So a lot of the work happens through conversations like this. So we talk about ideas and we talk about, what are our fears? What are our apprehensions? How do we overcome that ahead of time? So when we are in a crisis situation, we kind of have a rough game plan of how we're going to handle it.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking back to childhood where we had fire drills every so often and other earthquake drills, all sorts of emergencies. We didn't ever have mental health or crisis training drills. Maybe we should. I know they're doing different kinds of trainings now in schools that are just, you can't believe that they have to do those. But anyway, for workplaces or for faith communities, it can be helpful. And then also dividing up labor. Who's going to stay with the person in crisis? Who's going to be on the phone with first responders or with dispatch to communicate? It can help to have a team. And again, if your community is set up so that there's really only one person dealing with an individual, maybe bring that up at a next meeting on, is there an opportunity to have multiple staff members around or volunteers around? We did want to talk about active listening skills like Sergeant Gilmour alluded to. For motivational interviewing, which is a best practice, they talk about ORs, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it can be largely straightforward, but an open-ended question is in contrast to a closed-ended question that is usually answered by yes or no. So a bad closed-ended question might be, can you promise me that you're going to do this or that? And the answer is yes or no. Your options are limited. The person has, it stops the communication. It prevents it from going forward. Open-ended questions start with how or what or tell me about. Maybe they're not a question. Maybe it's a open-ended statement. Tell me about this or describe this. An affirmation, it's something like, I appreciate your honesty, or man, I can't imagine how difficult it was to disclose that to me. Affirming somebody for making a disclosure that moves the conversation forward. Reflective listening is exactly what it sounds like. See that note on empathy at the bottom. Reflective listening is, you're saying something like, so you're wondering if, or so you feel like. What you don't want to say is, what I hear you saying is, and then repeat word for word what they just say. That can come off as really patronizing. It takes some skill, it takes some practice. Try it with your partner, try it with your loved one, try it with your children. A lot of you probably do this as second nature in your personal lives. And then summarizing, you'll start that part of this active listening conversation saying something like, let me understand if I've got this, or what I've heard so far is this. And then you give the person an opportunity to correct your summary. No, that's not what I said. I said I'm angry because this. And then you could admit with some humility, okay, I didn't get that right. Thank you for it. You can provide another affirmation. I appreciate you letting me know how you're really feeling. Anything from the group, Dr. Hsu, Sergeant Gilmour? I know I'm kind of speeding through active listening because I think it was covered through previous training.
I really like the examples that you gave. One of the things that I like to share when trying to connect with somebody and garner some of that empathy is that a lot of the times people will say to you that, oh, you've never been through this, so how would you know? How do you even try to get to a point of understanding? And when you're using active listening skills, like asking those open-ended questions, well, tell me about like your experience. Part of it is their experience. And like, you know, unless we were right there with them, we'll never have that same experience. The other part though, is if we go back to the other slide, we don't really have to, but you'll see the emotionality part. Everybody has the whole spectrum of emotions within them. It's just ingrained in us since birth. And if you can connect with them on that same emotional level, and understand where they're coming from, which is the whole empathy part. And you do that just by creating really good rapport, just connecting in a meaningful way, bringing them to a level where you are open and receptive to hearing what they're saying rather than trying to help them problem solve something. So they can always say, or whomever it may be, like, it doesn't have to be somebody in the community. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. It could just be like, you know, family and friends, like that we're going to be spending dinner with in 2 days. If you want to be in that moment and be present with them, you don't have to have that same experience, is my point. You have the same emotion. And if you can understand how that experience got to that emotion, you'll be able to connect with them in a really meaningful way.
I'd like to echo what Dr. Hsu was saying as well. That validation of the other person's experience is huge. And, you know, empathy involves perspective taking, being able to put yourself in their position, even if you haven't experienced it before. Like I said, we've all felt angry, happy, sad. We've all felt a wide range of emotion. So part of empathy is trying to recognize the underlying meaning or message of what the person's saying, to recognize their emotion, and then finding a way to communicate back to them that you do recognize what they're experiencing, to validate their experience. And that's where the open-ended questions and the reflecting come in, to try to connect with the person.
Absolutely. And one other note, just on the summaries and the affirmations, and one of the hardest parts for some people is this needs to be sincere. Folks, regardless of their crisis state or mental health state, they can sniff out sincerity, and they can sniff out the opposite of sincerity. I'll use polite language, but they can tell if you are putting on airs or if you are faking your sincerity. So to the extent that you're able, it doesn't mean you have to pass a positive judgment on their behavior, but it definitely means that you have to, like Sergeant Gilmour said, try to be able to see things from their perspective, or put on their shoes. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Maslow hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure if this is exactly it word for word, but it's the same idea, is that everybody has the same universal needs for security and recognition, or a regard, some element of control or agency over their life. I think the older I get, I realize the less control I have over a lot of things, except for my reactions. And then, yeah, accomplishments and perspective. People want to know that they are seen and that they are understood. And if you think through a trauma-informed care lens, and I know Adrienne from Alcott Center presented on that last month, really understanding how many times our folks experiencing chronic homelessness must have been ignored, unseen, maligned, maybe just people walking past them without acknowledging them. And the cumulative impact of that trauma cannot be overstated. Again, these are some more examples of reflective listening. Let me be sure I heard what you said. It sounds like you're upset because, and again, the beauty about these things is, even if you're dealing with a person who's higher on the rationality, or no, higher on the emotionality and lower on the rationality, they can correct your affirmation. Your affirmation doesn't have to be spot on. It just shows that you're engaging, and it keeps the conversation moving forward. And then, of course, you're all here for safety, because sometimes, and most of the times, these tips don't work the way that we would plan. So we need to balance that empathy and active listening with assertiveness. It definitely doesn't mean that we get walked over. Something I've been learning recently is it's okay to say no. That is a word that can be in my vocabulary. Setting boundaries, setting limits in our work lives, in our personal lives. It's what will allow us to go back to that well of energy and self-care to come back and do a better job next time. So you want to keep track of your own body language and the other person in crisis' nonverbal communication as well. They probably went over this. I'm looking to Darcy in de-escalation techniques, but things like open palms as opposed to clenched fists. Clenched fists have a certain connotation. Open, Zoom doesn't lend itself well to this, but you want to have an open stance. Give yourself plenty of room. I think one of the good things about the pandemic has been people have been standing further apart from each other. Turns out we can still communicate pretty well from 6 feet apart. 3 feet apart was always a little too uncomfortable for me, and now we've got additional reason to put some more space between us. And then, like Sergeant Gilmour mentioned, and I know an upcoming training is going to be on this, what are you prepared to offer? What are you not prepared to offer? When are you willing to walk away from the situation? And who are you going to call for help and when? And again, thinking about the buddy system, is there somebody else that can call for help while you stay with the person in crisis, depending on what's happening? I did want to make a note here, and I'm going to find my notes so that I don't ad-lib this part. Some faith communities may already have established policies on what the community is able to give. So if somebody comes onto your campus and asks for money, you may have a standard response for that. Somebody asks for food or clothing or hygiene items, you may have those and you may be ready to respond. I will not tell you what's appropriate, what is enabling, what is the most helpful, but what I will say is when you give, be prepared to give unconditionally and don't be upset if you're not met with the gratitude that you think you deserve. You might be reaching somebody who's had a horrible day, horrible week, horrible decade, and they may not say thank you. They may say something much more colorful, and be okay with that. And then if you're asked for something that you're not prepared to give, I've always used the this and that. So I don't have this, but I have that. Would you like that? You know, if somebody asks you for 20 bucks and you either have it or you don't want to give it because that's not something you're prepared to do for everybody. I do recommend, if people feel compelled to give tangible items, hygiene kits are great, masks, hand sanitizer, bottled water, protein bars, things that are easy, especially if people, don't have all their teeth. We don't want to give somebody an apple or something that's really difficult to chew. And then maybe a resource guide with a list of some of the local service centers where folks can get some more intensive care. But again, be comfortable in advance. You don't want to be making a decision in the moment on what you're able to give. It would be like a quarterback trying to make a decision on what the play is going to be as the linebackers are bearing down on him in a blitz. So in the spirit of Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? This is pretty straightforward. The experts may contradict me, but if somebody's experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency or there's an immediate threat to life or limb, call 911. Don't have any qualms about that. For the reason that Sergeant Gilmour shared, there are already advanced training for law enforcement, and there are already these co-deployment models in most communities. I know Culver City and LAPD and some of the South Bay cities in Santa Monica, they have mental health clinicians full-time riding with patrol. So depending on how the call comes out to dispatchers, and we'll get to that in a minute, you may have a clinical social worker or a licensed clinician being the first point of contact. So again, for these emergencies, don't mess around, call 911. LA County Department of Mental Health does have a 24-hour helpline. It used to be called the Access Line, and you can call them and speak with an operator, describe the situation you have, and then they will advise you on whether a psychiatric mobile response team can be dispatched to the location. They can give you an approximate wait time for how long it might take a team to get out there, or they might direct you based on their consultation with supervisors. They might direct you to call your local law enforcement. Here's a note I did want to make sure that we unpacked, and Sergeant Gilmour, Dr. Hsu, you can pepper in on this too. But given all the different jurisdictions that we have, Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Miracle Mile, Westwood, Culver City, Palms, it can be helpful to learn the non-emergency police or sheriff station line for your community. There's more than I could put on one slide, so just type it into your search engine, Malibu Sheriff Station non-emergency line, and then program that into your phone. So for Santa Monica, I know that we have a non-emergency dispatch line that gets to the same joint dispatch for police and fire. That's one thing that people can keep in mind if the situation hasn't escalated to a full-blown 911 call. Sarge, did you want to say something?
Just a quick note on when we're talking about some of the safety and the boundaries, and you're deciding, am I going to try to offer some type of service to the person now? Do I need to call 911? Do I need to call non-emergency? We talked about using the active listening skills, trying to show empathy. If you have someone who's experiencing a crisis and you're not sure if that person is going to be dangerous or not, it's probably a good idea to stick with the active listening skills first before just trying to solve and rush through offering, because that person's not going to be receptive to what you're trying to offer them or the help until we've let them kind of vent a little bit. One of the tools that we like to use is using an iMessage. So if you are talking with an individual and they're agitated and you perceive that they may be stepping too close to you or reaching into their pockets or whatever behavior makes you uncomfortable, you can always say something like, I want to help you. It makes me feel nervous when you're doing X, Y, and Z. Instead of saying like, hey, can you stop that? Can you move over here? Or you're getting too close. If you put it in the first person, it takes the pressure off of them and puts it back on yourself as if you're the one who has that feeling. So it's a helpful way that you can use to connect with people. So if you're trying to offer, hey, we have this resource for you, and they could be yelling and screaming, hey, it sounds like you're upset and frustrated right now. It makes me a little nervous when you're walking away or you're stepping too close. I'm trying to help you. It would make me feel better if you had a seat over here. Things like that can help diffuse a situation as you're getting ready to determine, do I need to call 911? Do I need to call my local agency's non-emergency number?
So we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you, Curtis. Does the LA County Homeless Outreach Portal reach the same people as the LA County Mental Health 800 number? Does one result in a quicker response? Pros and cons of one over the other? Great question. So LA Homeless Outreach Portal, la-hop.org. I'd recommend everyone check that out, and I'll put it in the chat. Oh, it's on the slide too. But before you are able to make a request, you will have to click through that you acknowledge that you understand what you're requesting, and it'll give you some background on the time it takes to help somebody. So basically, you will tell the portal the geographic location of the person that you're requesting help for, whether it's one person or 5 people, you can input the number, and then a description of the person as well as their needs. And I just need to tell you, this is not a same day response. So this is more useful for people who are in like an encampment, or if it's the same person at the same corner or the same alley over a period of days or weeks. Because all of these requests go to, based on the geography, they go to the assigned outreach coordinator through the county system, and then they get dispatched to the appropriate outreach team. So it could be 2, 3, 4 days, depending on when you make the request, before a team gets sent out. For the mental health helpline, I would say my experience over the past 8, 9 years is it really depends on what's going on. I do know that their psychiatric mobile response teams give priority to calls involving children or school calls. So depending on if teams are tied up with a call in one area of the county, they may not have a team that can deploy to your crisis within an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours. And so that may dictate whether you need to call for law enforcement or a medical team to come out. So yeah, LA HOP is not a rapid response or same day response. It's more for a long-term, hey, this person seems to be coming back day after day after day issue. And then the LA County Mental Health Line, it really depends on the availability of their resources. This might be a good time to mention that there is statewide legislation to develop an alternative crisis mental health helpline, a 988 number. And the last thing I read on that is it was expected to launch in summer 2022. So what we've been telling people is we've heard these calls for crisis reform. We're working on it. I know that's what our state folks would say as well. It's just in the meantime, these are the resources that we have at our disposal. And then LA County does have, Department of Mental Health does have a newer program called the Therapeutic Transport Van that staffs a licensed mental health clinician and somebody with lived mental health experience. And they're driving around in a van and they're dispatched to certain types of non-violent behavioral health calls. So they're already developing these resources and they're already out in the community. The issue is scaling them up so that there are enough of these teams out for as many crises that we're having. I hope that answered your questions. If not, keep them coming in the chat. So when you do end up calling, if you've decided in advance what your threshold is and the situation exceeds that threshold, you're going to talk to a dispatcher most likely and be prepared to tell them your name and your callback number and then what you have. What's the nature of the crisis? Is it a medical situation? Is it a violent situation? Is somebody being threatened or assaulted, or you're not sure? And be sure to say that. Address, this is really important. Not all of us are spatially gifted, but it can be helpful to know not only what the address is of the location, if you're a church or a synagogue or a temple, but also what location on the campus. I'm at the southeast corner of 7th and Broadway or something like that. And then you want to give a good head-to-toe description of the person in crisis. And that usually starts with the person's name if you have it, or an alias. And then you want to go with like a observed gender, race, age. So for me, it'd be a male, white, 30s, height and weight. Can't tell how tall he is. He's sitting down. Weight, average, maybe slightly above average weight. Hair and eye color, clothing. Oh, he's got a green plaid shirt. Things like that, so that when the team does respond, they'll be able to identify the person, especially in a crowded area. They'll be able to go to the person they're talking about. Dr. Hsu or Sergeant Gilmour, is there anything you wanted to add about helpful information to give to the dispatcher?
Say from a police standpoint, it's really looking at the behavior. And then I would assume that if we're calling 911, then we're feeling some sense of a violent action may take place, or we need help right now, right? So part of it is being able to recognize our own emotions and things that we're feeling, so that when we're describing the situation to the dispatcher, we can get the right response in the right time frame. So if you have someone who's yelling and screaming, and we tell dispatch, because we hear it sometimes, where this person is being violent. And right, so we may perceive yelling and screaming and moving their arms, kicking around in the air as a violent behavior. That's going to escalate a law enforcement response to where a cop may respond thinking someone's being attacked or physically assaulted right now, which would be different than verbally assaulted. And that can help change how many officers are sent, what types of officers are sent given your jurisdiction. So a lot of it is knowing the behavior that you're exhibiting, or that the person's exhibiting, to relay that back to the dispatcher. Another tip as well is it can always be good to give dispatch your description as well. So that way when officers respond, they know who called, who's the person that is dealing with the individual in crisis or exhibiting a violent behavior. If you call 911, if you're able to keep your phone with you, if it's a cell phone, oftentimes police officers will ask dispatch to get more information. They'll want to call you. Given the level of emergency that you're experiencing, you can always just keep your phone on and don't hang up from dispatch. Even if you have to keep the open line and put it in your pocket and you're not actively listening to it, you can always pick it up and talk to the dispatcher again instead of trying to call to give additional information.
One of the challenges with this is that dispatch is constantly being bombarded with phone calls, walking the floors of communications, both in Valley and in Central. It's just call after call. So one of the things that you really want to do is just be patient. If you're noticing that the crisis is just kind of like on pause and like you're still unsure, doing your best to write down all the information, like using your smartphone and just taking some notes and just kind of, being very mindful of your situational awareness. I'd always say that your safety should come first. And then after that, addressing the issue, because it really matters. We instinctivly want to help. We instinctively want to be able to do the best that we can for everybody that we can. but it's challenging sometimes. So being mindful and situationally aware is going to really be key, especially as you're making this call, because being full disclosure, I've been a victim of like a couple of things, and it's sometimes difficult to get through. So just be patient, write down all the things that like you see on the checklist, being mindful of your own safety, and then kind of like, making sure that like the situation isn't going to somehow escalate to a point where your safety is in jeopardy. The other thing I wanted to mention is that if you're in LAPD jurisdiction, each of the divisions has a community community meeting, and you'll meet with the captains, you'll meet with the SLOs, who are the senior lead officers for that division. And one of the things that's really nice is just being able to kind of get to know them. I think it's once a month with the pandemic and all the things that are going on, especially as we're doing this through Zoom, being mindful of the fact that like they are still doing it through Zoom. They may have come back into a in-person kind of a meeting, but each division, because I noticed that a lot of you are in the city of LA, has a community meeting. So it's almost always with the captains, always with the SLOs, and just being able to share with them your experiences, because some of the problems are constant and chronic. And so being able to address it so then that you can work fluidly with like the law enforcement personnel in your area is going to be really, really important as they get to know you and you get to know them. The last thing, and I'm sorry I'm rushing a little bit because I actually have to go, is if you're in the city of LA, being able to utilize the 311 number. 311 is a great resource. You call it, especially for non-emergency things. But they also have an app, so then you can engage it or interact within that format. But at the end of the day, everything should lead up to somehow ensuring that the safety of you and the safety of the other person isn't compromised. And whatever the best way you do that, I think is will lead to some really good outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hsu. And yeah, this slide, I've left that up there. Just remember, you're inviting a stranger onto your agency or your organization's grounds to resolve a crisis. They will probably only, unless they've dealt with this person before, they'll probably only have the information that you give the dispatcher. So give them what they need to know and not what they don't. And again, what everyone said earlier about documenting as things are happening or before the crisis escalates, in case it's a while before somebody responds. In this last slide, many agencies or organizations will have incident forms for various types of somebody slips and falls and you have to administer first aid, or if it's something more serious like a mental health or a violent crisis. If your agency or organization doesn't have a documentation or an incident reporting form, maybe you can ask about starting one. And the basic tips would be date and time, location, people involved, who was called, how it resolved, and if there's any follow-up, such as Bob G is now suspended from the community grounds for 30 days based on XYZ behavior. It'll be very customized to each community. I know a lot of people don't like to dole out consequences, so we totally understand that. But documentation matters, especially when trying to link vulnerable homeless individuals to intensive treatment. The VI SPDAT of vulnerability, the coordinated entry assessment, which is used to prioritize housing resources. There's a question on emergency service, police and fire contacts, and the higher the score, the more likely that person's going to be prioritized for a housing first intervention. So I know it can be second nature to record this type of data and to share it with your coordinated entry system lead at St. Joseph Center, but it can go a long way and it can help escalate getting people the treatment that they need, especially for the people who are most chronically homeless and with the most chronic behavioral health issues. Self-care, again, I am reluctant to speed through this one because it's probably the most important, but having the organization, much like you all did today, starting with a mindfulness exercise, having the organization really emphasize on self-care practices for its staff, for its members, for its volunteers. These can be trying. These can be trying incidents. Don't take any of the attacks, whether personal, physical, or verbal. Don't take them personally. Know that there's a lot more going on, and these aren't about you. So I see some comments in the chat, and I do want to get to those. And I don't know who all can stay a couple minutes beyond 10, but really just wanted to emphasize self-care both as an organization and as an individual. I know one of the staff that I trained at a previous agency, he was in a position that had a lot of crisis interactions. And after every situation resolved, he would go back to his desk, pull out his drawer, and he would take a soccer ball and he would just juggle the soccer ball around his desk for about 5 minutes. And that was his way to decompress, to have kind of a grounding experience where he attached to some other activity and he brought himself back so that he could work with the next person in need. So that's an example of when I liked. Somebody else used a coloring book and didn't, it's not like you had a half-hour coloring break, but pull out your book, do a little doodling. Most of the people that I know, their self-care exercises have a physical component, a tactile component. Some people will definitely develop their own strategies. So hopefully that can come up in the boundaries conversation next month. And with that, I don't know how much time everyone has. I know Dr. Hsu had to leave, but did want to ask folks, and we'll start with Curtis and Amy. Don't know if you are able to unmute yourself, but want to open it up to a couple questions.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, this particular, it really is a question of like which of the different resources or avenues of contact that you had on the screen, maybe also now also including where does 311 fit into that thing. But the situation in question I had was in West LA, so it's that West LA jurisdiction. A woman of middle years was basically walking down the street and talking to herself, kind of her physical, her walk was very disjointed, and she was taking off her clothes as she walked down the street. And so she wasn't walking in the street. I didn't have the sense that she was about to put herself in traffic, but she was obviously very distressed. And so, so I knew about the portal, but my phone and my thumbs, trying to do something there. And but I was like everyone else, I was concerned as to whether calling 911 was the proper response or not. So given what you've said, would either calling the access, the 800 number you posted, or if I had known the non-emergency number for the West LA, police department, would that have been the best thing to do, or is 311 the best thing to do?
I'd say, Curtis, thank you very much for your question. I'd say the first thing to do, if you haven't already, is get to know those senior lead officers for the West LA station, because that's an additional resource that could be helpful too. And then so when you're seeing that woman walking down the street with the behavior you're describing, my gut tells me to call the non-emergency number to get a, because that could very quickly escalate into her running into traffic or type of behavior. The 311 system for some Department of Mental Health field response teams are not always an immediate response. Oftentimes they get dispatched countywide. So for a situation like that, it's probably better to call your local police department. And as you place a non-emergency call, you could also call the senior lead officer to give them a heads up. And as you're monitoring her behavior, if she does start to walk into the street or start harming herself, that's when you could call 911 and escalate the medical and police response to that.
And I think this is another opportunity to just echo the idea that calls within the last 2 years for community calls to develop alternatives to incarceration and to develop non-law enforcement crisis response teams. These activities are underway. And I know that one of the plans the LA County Department of Mental Health had was to have a non-law enforcement crisis response team available to respond to virtually any call in LA County within an hour. And right now, geographically, LA County is huge, from Lancaster, Palmdale to Malibu to Long Beach, and that's not realistic, but it's where they're going as a county. So, you know, this conversation may be much different a year from now when the 988 system is closer to being rolled out, and when, you know, there are more teams on the ground, like these DMH therapeutic transport vans. My understanding is this call, Curtis, that you mentioned would be right up their alley, where you don't have a clear-cut violent behavior. It's not a clear-cut medical situation, and you can send a team with a peer with lived experience and a licensed clinician out there. I think the reality is these teams are ramping up. So until then, you have two choices. It's the non-emergency line or the 800 number, and really it will depend. And you might find that the 800 number, based on their team's availability, will send you to your local law enforcement anyway.
A quick follow-up, and thank you both. A quick follow-up, is the 311 and the 800 number, do they go to the same places, or are they different, go to different people?
That's a good question. I think Dr. Hsu was referencing the LA City 311, so I'm not as sure about that. Our 311 in the city of Santa Monica is not tied into our emergency dispatch, so it's not the same. But I would have to get more information on LA 311. I can get that back to you. I can probably get your contact information from Darcy. And then to Amy's question, she had a specific issue at St. Paul's.
Sorry, we have, hi, I'm Amy. I'm on the council at St. Paul's, and we have an individual who has been living at the front of our church. He has some mental illness and a cat. And he lives on the property at night. We've had a little arrangement with him that he feels safer there at night. And so as long as he's not causing any problems or making a mess, he stays there at night. And then he's supposed to leave in the morning because we have a preschool on the property. Well, there was an issue about 2 weeks ago when I guess he felt threatened, and he started lashing out at the families coming in with their kids and the teachers. The police were called, they came. And we as a faith organization are trying to be helpful and empathetic to this man, Kenneth. But I don't know at what point are we enabling him, or he needs, I feel like we've done everything we can and he needs extra help. Is this an opportunity to like call the LA HLP, homeless? Is that
Absolutely.
is this
Yep.
now we're at that point? Okay. I just want to I want to do the right thing for this man, because he's been on the street for a long time. He told me 12 years. So
yeah. So I don't think I have had the savvy to open up LA Hop, but I would recommend if anyone hasn't checked it out. The fields are relatively straightforward. If you don't have information, just give them what you do have in terms of a description of the person. If there's a phone number for you and you would like to be contacted when an outreach team goes out, I know that a lot of times outreach teams would love to connect with a compassionate citizen. A lot of the requests they get are more about remove this person, they're a nuisance. But anytime they get somebody who's clearly compassionate and wants to help and has existing relationships with the person, they will tie into those natural supports. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Amy,
Can I just add a little bit to that? Mount Olive had a similar situation and really wanted to connect this gentleman with homeless services so that he could get back on his feet. And unfortunately, because they also have a preschool, he was required to leave by 7 a.m. and he never showed up until like 9 o'clock at night. So the outreach teams were unable to do that. They ended up having to make a special arrangement to come in extra early on a day in order to do that. So it doesn't automatically help. And if they show up at 8 and he's long gone, it just has to be sometimes arranged a little bit more fine-tuned.
Okay.
For sure.
Thank you.
And that kind of goes back to our first slide about learn, not just the sworn and emergency responders, but learn the community providers in your area. So For Santa Monica, the key providers are St. Joseph Center and the People Concern and Step Up on Second. And I know other parts of the West Side have Alcott Center and other groups. So really get to know those groups and find out what they need to support their individuals. They may have hygiene kits and things like that, but when it comes time to place somebody in permanent housing, they may be placing them into a unit that's not very furnished. And the faith community, if you've known Kenneth for years and years and years, maybe you can put together a little move-in kit for him when it is time for him to move off the streets.
Sergeant, did you have something to say? Yeah.
I did a couple things. With all of your groups out there, obviously we want to help people. We want to be compassionate. There is a component to setting the proper boundaries that we talked about a little bit earlier. And this sometimes can be a difficult conversation, right? From a law enforcement perspective, if a group such as yours allows a person to stay on the property, you've now given them the right to be on your property. So then when a situation happens, such as Kenneth creating a disturbance for the parents and the families coming to preschool, at that point, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball for law enforcement helping you immediately. Mm-hmm. So let's say that behavior continues and you'd like him, unfortunately, removed from the property, whether it's trespassing or something else. Hopefully it doesn't get to that level.
Right.
But if it does, you've already allowed him access to the property and to stay there, and it makes it that much more difficult to actually help him off. Okay. So some of the stuff that Darcy's saying, a lot of those mental health outreach teams, they don't work evening hours. So that would be hard for them to access. And what Brian's saying, getting to know some of the other shelters and resources in your area so that when Kenneth or the next Kenneth comes to your property and wants some help, and you do offer him a place to stay, from day one, you should also be reaching out to these other groups to start the conversation, to get the ball rolling. So hopefully the outreach teams can make contact prior to any behavior escalating or something being unwanted. But, having an alternate response, somewhere to direct Kenneth, but trying to balance the needs to be compassionate and help someone with also protecting your community and those attending your congregations and properties. That is a tough conversation, but something to be considered.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I inject? Our church was trying to do safe parking and the neighborhood would have no part of it. So we started supporting the ministries in West LA that support the homeless. And so we made up this card with the resources, and IHOP is on it and all the others, but that were available, like People's Concern, you could get a shower during the pandemic, stuff like that. So that was sort of the icebreakers. We're saying, sorry, don't stay here. But the other thing that concerns me a little bit, and you've brought it up, Lewis, to cover it helpfully, some of the homeowners are irate by the time you're called. I mean, it's been hard around here. So it goes both ways. And thank you for the de-escalation. Thank you for all the information. This is great networking. I really appreciate it. Thank you, West Side Coalition, for all of it. Thank you.
Yeah, Melissa, you bring up a good point that, this whole presentation, we've been talking about a crisis with, someone experiencing a mental health issue or experiencing homelessness. But a crisis could be dealing with neighbors and residents, right? Really, a crisis can be dealing with anyone.
And by the way, we made this up for everybody. Like put it in your glove compartment and give it away with the money that you want to give away or whatever. But it's helpful. It's almost like Dumbo's feather, I know there's a way out of this.
Melissa, is there any way you can share that with all of us so we don't have to reinvent the wheel?
I'll make sure I send it to you, but yes.
Okay.
Can I get it to you?
And you can send it to me, Melissa, and I can forward it back out to everybody that registered.
I will say that we were looking specifically for people who were helping during the pandemic, and there's a lot more than just this, but this is what.
Well, the jumping off spot.
Yeah. I'll send that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go pick somebody up, so it won't be right now. Bye. Thank you.
Brian?
Yes.
There you are. Are there any more questions? to address? Anybody have any burning questions? Well, I appreciate this conversation very much. And as I had shared with Brian at the beginning of this, you know, these things unfortunately do happen. And we have a pastor, Mark Jones, with Westwood Presbyterian Church, that is also a board member for the Westside Coalition. And a gentleman came to the church for assistance and ended up beating him up. And he is still suffering from a brain hemorrhage because of that incident. That's unusual, but it can happen. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to include safety. And we want to also, call back to some of the things that were shared about have a plan in place. Never go out alone. Go in where there's two people, those types of things. It's just a conversation that needs to happen at every one of your faith organizations, so that and you have the resources and have more information. This has been really, really good because we understand that you are compassionate people that want to do good, that want to see somebody who's struggling get back on their feet. And, there are a lot of resources. And so we just have to work together. And, I just so appreciate, the information that's been shared. The Santa Monica HLP team is such an amazing branch of the police department because they know everybody on the streets by name and they're respected in the community. So that is such a great model. If there's any other question at all, now is your time. We've gone a little bit over, but I think it's been really important. Any final questions?
Yes, Darcy, if I may.
Yes.
Sergeant Gilmour, thank you for what you're sharing. So the getting to know because our faith community, the Quaker meeting is in Santa Monica. And so one thing I guess I didn't know, first thing, maybe I need to get to know who the senior, I think you said senior lead officer is for that section of the city where we are. But is that person also then, but the thing that you had in part, this health team or Santa Monica health team, is that separate from, in other words, is there, is it possible if we have a situation to reach out directly to you or your team as opposed to going through the community, the senior lead officer for our section of the city? How does that work?
That's a great question. So my team focuses primarily on homeless and mental health, and the neighborhood resource officer focuses on every other issue that could be affecting yourself. I put my email in the chat. Feel free to send me an email, and my team, myself, I can come out and meet you at your property and we can get to know you, build that relationship. And I can also put you in contact with the neighborhood resource officer who's specifically assigned to your area. So between the two units that we have, we should be able to build that relationship and try to address those needs that you're having. And there's a good chance that for some of those experiencing homelessness that you contact, our team probably, and Brian's team as well, probably knows them as well. So we can help out there.
Thank you.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I am just, this is a lot to process. And I'm so grateful that you guys took your time to do this for us. And we will have this recorded. We'll put it up. It will be available for people to go over again, and for all of those that missed this because of our timing. So this is valuable information, and we just appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you for everybody. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, you guys.
Enjoy your family, Darcy.
Hey, I'm going to go do that right now.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.